Scotland, northwest England, West Wales as well. For most, though, Friday's looking dry, and although it will turn cloudier in the south and east of England, we'll still see some bright spells into the afternoon, and it will feel a whole lot milder compared to recent days, 11 to 13 Celsius. We will have lost that wind chill, but we've replaced it with a lot of cloud, and that cloud sticks around for bonfire night. But during the evening, actually, most places will stay dry with relatively light winds, so it's not looking too bad for any bonfire and fireworks displays. But it does turn more unsettled towards the end of the night for northern and western Scotland, with heavier rain arriving here. And for most, it's a much milder night, temperatures staying up at 6 to 8 Celsius by and large. A bright start then across much of England and Wales for the weekend, but it turns unsettled across Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then later northwest England and North Wales. Heavy rain at times, particularly over western hills, and that strong wind reaching gale force around exposed coasts. It turns even windier on Saturday night in the far north of Scotland with some big waves. Drier further south, and a blustery day on Sunday.
On Tonight Live, it's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton. My big question guest is one of the most high-profile politicians of his generation. David Mellor served under Margaret Thatcher, was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and has survived many a political scandal. He's live in the studio at 10. In The Clash, should we build more nuclear power stations? And in my monologue, why don't the facts seem to matter anymore when it comes to COVID? I say no jabs for kids and no Plan B COVID restrictions. But what do you think? I'll see you at 9.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. A very good evening. It's 8 p.m. on Brazier tonight. The Edinburgh Primary School asking boys to wear a skirt in the interests of gender equality. Also, hi there, it's the Duchess of Sussex. Why is Meghan Markle cold-calling politicians in America? And just when you thought North Korea couldn't get any madder, Kim Jong-un bans any mention of his dad. All that's coming up. But first, the news with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The GB News headlines this hour. An MP who threatened to throw acid at another woman has avoided jail. And a warning, the video we're about to show you does contain some flashing images. Claudia Webbe was handed a 10-week term, suspended for 2 years, for harassing Michelle Merritt. She was also given 200 hours community service. The Chief Magistrate described her behaviour as callous and intimidatory. Webbe says she plans to appeal. The Prime Minister says he's very sad that Owen Paterson, who he described as a friend and colleague for decades, will resign as the MP for North Shropshire. The former Tory cabinet minister faced suspension for breaching lobbying rules. He said, "The last 2 years have been an indescribable nightmare. I will remain a public servant," he said, but outside the cruel world of politics. Well, that announcement came after the government decided to hold a second vote on an overhaul of Parliament's disciplinary procedures. Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey says the move to rip up the system was shameful.
What Conservative MPs and Cabinet Ministers led by the Prime Minister did for me yesterday was brought shame on Parliament. You simply cannot have a system where you try to rip up the rules in order to protect one of your mates, when an independent process has said they've broken those rules 14 times.
A hospital electrician has admitted murdering, then sexually assaulting 2 women decades before abusing dozens of corpses in mortuaries. David Fuller killed Wendy Nell and Caroline Pearce in separate attacks in Tunbridge Wells in Kent in 1987. DNA evidence linked the 67-year-old to at least 99 potential victims at the now closed Kent and Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury. The Health Secretary has now ordered a review of access to NHS mortuaries. The first pill designed to treat coronavirus has been approved by the UK medicines regulator. The tablet will be given to patients recently diagnosed with COVID and those who are vulnerable to illnesses like diabetes or heart disease. In clinical trials, the drug, developed by a US company, cut the risk of hospitalisation and death. Yorkshire County Cricket Club has been suspended from hosting international and major matches. That's after Azim Rafiq said he'd faced racism and bullying during his 2 spells at the club. On Twitter today, the 30-year-old wrote, "The sport I love is institutionally racist." Yorkshire's handling of an investigation into Rafiq's allegations have been criticised widely by politicians. The club will appear before a parliamentary committee in 2 weeks. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now time for Brazier.
So it's been a pretty bad day for the reputation of Britain's parliamentarians. The former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson quit as an MP and accused Westminster colleagues of mocking the suicide of his late wife. A little over an hour after his resignation, the former Labour backbencher, Claudia Webbe, who now sits as an independent, was handed a suspended jail sentence after being found guilty of threatening to douse a love rival with acid. It means a certain by-election in Paterson's North Shropshire constituency and possibly one in Webbe's Leicester East seat, while Owen Paterson hit out at his former parliamentary colleagues, describing politics as a cruel world. Claudia Webbe has described herself as a black woman in a white court. Today, the sentencing judge has criticised her for playing the victim card. However, it's the resignation of Owen Paterson that is likely to leave a lasting mark, perhaps a stain, on this Parliament. An investigation by Parliament Standards Committee found he'd breached lobbying rules on behalf of 2 companies. He faced a 6-week suspension. Many Tory backbenchers were unhappy that he had no right to appeal, and the government yesterday backed an amendment to pause Paterson's case and set up a new appeals body. Then today, another U-turn. Ministers abandoned those reform plans after the opposition said they would boycott them. The government will still work on a new appeals system, but not one that could potentially absolve Paterson, with any hope of an appeal gone and his family left, as you'd expect perhaps, distraught by events. The former Environment Secretary decided to resign his seat. Well, joining me from Glasgow, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, not a fantastic look today for the mother of all parliaments. Hello, Darren. I don't think you can hear me.
You're right.
There you go. Sorry. Darren.
No worries, Colin. I was just saying that they are very different cases, aren't they, involving two different parties, but you're right in suggesting that they are tarnishing Westminster politics and MPs as a whole. I think on the Owen Paterson case, clearly today he saw the writing on the wall. He was unaware, for example, that the government were going to make this U-turn this morning. He was not going to be able to go through that appeals process. Clearly, the new rules the government are talking about introducing were not going to retrospectively apply to him. And so I think having been ditched by the Conservative Party effectively, dumped by Downing Street, and knowing that he was very unlikely to be exonerated, he felt he had no choice. Interesting, his statement, as you say, did repeatedly refer to how the last couple of days had been intolerable, that he wanted to get away from this. And this obviously relates back very tragically to the suicide of his wife last year, of which he blames that extensive investigation by the Commons Standards Commissioner for one of the reasons why she did take her own life. But I think there are wider questions beyond what has happened to Owen Paterson and the situation he has found himself in about this perception that MPs were trying to mark their own homework, that they were trying to change the game, essentially, and the rules around the game. But also questions as well, I think, Colin, about Downing Street's political antennae. Why did they not see this coming? Why did they not gain this scenario that we may well end up in this situation? And this is far from the first U-turn we've seen the government make, though this one was pretty quick and pretty dramatic. With Claudia Webbe, this is a case, as I say, that is very separate, and the Labour Party have taken a very different line in all of this. They are now tonight saying, having kicked her out of the party, that they want her to resign as the MP for Leicester East. And if she doesn't, they're talking about how they would support a recall petition to get rid of her in that constituency. A recall petition needs 10,000 constituents to essentially force a by-election. I think almost certainly she is either going to have to resign or that is a real prospect. And in the end, we're now looking at 4 by-elections potentially before Christmas, Colin. Really interesting politics, and it'll be fascinating to see how the public potentially have and will respond to what has happened over the last couple of days. They are very different cases involving two very different politicians. But in the end, there is a sense, I think, from the public that maybe this is MPs essentially being able to get away with things and having one rule for them, and certainly a perception that there's a different rule for the rest of us.
Darren, thanks very much. Dog in the background. Now it's time for the Brazier angle. A stretch limo and Secret Service type heavies turned up outside a Glasgow fish and chip shop earlier this week, apparently to collect a takeaway for Joe Biden. It was a wind-up. But in Washington, D.C., where the president has now returned from COP26, a couple of senators fancied themselves victims of a different kind of practical joke. Out of the blue, they received calls on their private phones, a number only shared with a handful of political intimates. On seeing that the number was withheld, one of these senators assumed it had to be her boss, so she took the call pronto. And just like the chippy in Glasgow, she initially thought it was a prank. A voice on the line began thus: "Hi, this is the Duchess of Sussex." Well, Meghan Markle has played a few roles in her life, but this time she was actually playing herself. It really was her calling, she explained, to lobby, unpaid, for a political cause. Now, the idea that Meghan Markle could be cold calling is the term senior American politicians out of the blue will strike some people as odd. But there's nothing wrong about it if she can persuade someone who has the private phone numbers of senior politicians to share them with her, then fair enough. It's the sort of thing journalists do all the time. What's arguably improper about this is that opening line. We all get cold calls, don't we, from people trying to flog us something we don't want. They often try and capture our interest with a clever one-liner. But only one person in the world gets to deploy that humdinger of an opening gambit. Hi, this is the Duchess of Sussex. Behind those few syllables lie centuries of reputational credibility. And this is a woman who understands the power of corporate imaging. She and her husband have, after all, recently signed up to help a bank with its branding. It's things like this which have made Buckingham Palace and the Queen herself deeply sceptical about the Sussexes. They are a couple of mediocre talents who know they can earn a fortune and wield influence out of all proportion with their abilities if they leverage their royal status. It doesn't matter that they have done so much to undermine the institution of monarchy. They have their title, and though it glistens with the stardust they didn't put there, they are determined to make the most of it. Those telephone calls to senators, by the way, have been accompanied by letters. Letters written on headed notepaper with the Office of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex at the top in italicised writing so big it's probably visible from space. It's spectacularly tasteless, pure Ruritania, but in America it's likely to be effective. Don't let it ever be said that the Sussexes are not aware of the value of being part of a royal family whose reputation they've slandered and whose trust they've squandered. The letter, by the way, is a classic of the genre, containing, if it's possible, more self-glorifying humbug than anything you've heard this last week at COP26, with the possible exception of that transparently self-serving speech from Jeff Bezos. In her letter, the Duchess stresses her humble origins. I grew up, she says, on the $4.99 salad bar at Sizzler. It's an odd way of depicting a childhood which involved private primary and secondary schools, but all of a piece for someone whose past is one gigantic, opaque marketing exercise, including, that is, her recent past and that lucrative insertion of hers into the royal family. Of course, there's nothing new about royals lobbying politicians. Charles does it more than he ought to have done over the years, but in his decades-long championing of the planet, the Prince of Wales palpably believes in a cause bigger than himself. He was in such a hurry to tell the world about looming environmental catastrophe on Monday, for instance, there he goes, that he almost tripped on his way to the podium. And over the years, he's talked not just to politicians, but to thousands of ordinary folk, from hedge layers to horticulturalists, about a cause that's closest to his heart. He listens, whereas it often seems like the Sussexes just expect to be heard. The high-profile presence of Charles at COP was about a sincerely held belief. There hasn't been much to praise COP for, but the absence of the Sussexes private jetting in on a cloud of sanctimony would have put the tin lid on the whole oversized, overblown, overhyped, over-here enterprise. COP has felt like an occasion custom-built for some of their cheesy and banal sound bites. Thank God they weren't there. That's the Brazier angle. Let's turn to the royal author and commentator, Angela Levin, who joins me now. Angela, very good evening to you. Thanks for joining me.
Well, I can't be that. It was sensational.
Well, that's very kind of you.
Yes.
but was it fair?
Well, I think it is fair because they do exactly what they like without considering anybody else, pushing through any sort of good manners and what they have actually gained as a royal. It's just all about them. And I think if you do that, then you must expect some sort of response.
Let's just unpick this bit by bit. So on the phone calls, as I say, if she can persuade somebody that she knows to give up a private number for a Republican senator or two, so she can cold call them, and it's unpaid lobbying. There's no graft involved here. This is just a cause. This instance, it was paid paternity leave, a cause close to her heart. There's nothing wrong in that.
Well, I'm not sure about that, actually. I think there's a certain thing called good manners. And if you are a member of the royal family, she's no longer a working member. But as you said, she uses her title all the time, endlessly, never without a title, on books, before she speaks, talking to children, any age. It's her title. So in that way, you should actually behave properly. The right way of doing it is to get your secretary to ring their secretary, and then you arrange to meet. The fact that you couldn't know her identity before you answered the phone was, I think, part of the whole ploy. What was she hiding? She knew that they would answer because they would imagine that it would be somebody senior who wanted to talk to them. So it's sort of trapping everybody, isn't it? The whole focus is making getting one over somebody else. whether it's the Queen or anybody or somebody making coffee. You know, it's always, you've got to win. I think she's remarkable at one way, that she's so ruthless that she can drive through anything, seems to have no conscience except making up things that might have happened to her but haven't. And that's how they go about things. And I think a lot of people I speak to are not actually necessarily interested in the monarchy, but feel that it's sort of dirty tricks one after the other.
And just sort of anthropologically, it's just fascinating to see how far they'll go, Angela. I mean, I mentioned the letter. I wish we'd had the foresight to be able to show people it, but take it from me, and you've seen it too, I'm sure, A4, but it's yay big at the top. The office of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. As I say, you could probably see it from wherever Jeff Bezos was in low Earth orbit. It's that big. But it's not just the sort of tasteless gaucheness of the thing. It's what's then in it, the content, the substance of the thing. And actually, it's a little bit economical with the actuality. I'm not going to use the L word because you never know. She's fairly litigious. But this whole sort of narrative about how she was a poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks, it's garbage.
Yeah. Well, this is nonsense. We see three types of Meghan in that letter, which is quite interesting. We see the get up and go Meghan, very good. We see, which calls herself the mum. She does it sort of apologetically. She's not a politician. She's not grand. She's not this. She's not that. She's talking to them as a mum. So she's even using her children to get what she wants, actually. I mean, it annoyed me. She then says that she had almost a poverty-stricken childhood because the best they could do for a meal was a $5 salad. But if you look at her TIG, which was her website that she stopped writing in just before she got engaged to Harry, but of course nowadays you can always get back and look at it, it's full of her going, saying, went to the most fantastic restaurant, you know, it costs $57 to have a steak, and so on. So she's even sort of lies against herself. Her father at the time apparently won a huge amount of money. I think it's $275,000 in the lottery, and he spent a lot of it on her. So she didn't have anything she wanted. She went to a school that cost, you know, $28,000 for her to go to. So that was nonsense. And then at the end of the letter, which is what made my stomach turn, she then becomes a sort of little mummy, and she says, you know, from me and also Archie, Lily and Harry. Now, you don't put Archie and Lily in something that you're writing about, a serious thing about giving families money to look after their family and not necessarily have to go to work when the child is very young. It's not businesslike, is it? It's also using them to promote herself, which is not right. And then she puts Harry at the end of it, as if he's the last person who's important. It's not Harry and Meghan and our children. It's, you know, Archie, Lily. But she did say Lily, not Lilabat. She didn't use what she actually is calling Lily, that upset everybody, including the Queen, and used a sort of nickname that was really reserved for the late Duke of Edinburgh to call his loved wife. You know, it was a sort of intimate thing. My view on that, actually, if I may say so, was that she's so angry with the Queen, who wouldn't let her make money out of being royal, that at some point she will set up a Lilibet Foundation. She's a feminist, so she's got Archie with a foundation. She's going to have Lilibet with a foundation. And they will go to do lots of commercial purchases, and the Queen will be involved in that because of her name. And I think I might be completely wrong, I hope I am, but I think it's a pretty nasty thing to do.
Angela, do you know why? I mentioned COP at the end there. Do you know why they weren't? It's probably a very simple answer, why they weren't at COP. I ask because it just feels like it was a custom-built occasion for them swanning in, issuing assorted vacuities about the environment and how they're going to do wonders for the planet, etc., etc. Why aren't they there?
Well, I can't help you on that one, I'm afraid. I don't know whether they weren't there because they didn't know about it, whether they didn't want to go and be in competition with Prince Charles and William and Catherine. You know, they wouldn't have been in the same level So I don't think Meghan wants to do that. She wants to be number one, which is absolutely her priority. Or whether the royal family tried to block them. I don't think they would have done that because it would have seeped out and we'd all know that and think how awful, but or how terrific, depending on which side you're on. But I don't know why they weren't there. Perhaps they weren't doing enough. Perhaps all their jetting around didn't work for them, although it did for a lot of other people.
Yeah, maybe they couldn't be promised a cavalcade as long as the president's. It was quite long, wasn't it? Angela Levin, it's so lovely to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. After the break, why are boys as young as 3 being urged to wear skirts in school to promote gender equality?
On Tonight Live, it's Mark Dolan in for Dan Wootton. My big question guest is one of the most high-profile politicians of his generation. David Mellor served under Margaret Thatcher, was Chief Secretary to the Treasury and has survived many a political scandal. He's live in the studio at 10. In The Clash, should we build more nuclear power stations? And in my monologue, why don't the facts seem to matter anymore when it comes to COVID? I say no jabs for kids and no Plan B COVID restrictions. But what do you think? I'll see you at 9.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Now, it's been reported today that boys as young as 3 or 4, are being urged to wear a skirt at a primary school in Edinburgh in order to promote equality. An email apparently sent to parents of pupils at Castleview Primary said the school could provide skirts to any boy who didn't have one. The initiative apparently seeks to mimic a campaign by a number of schools in Spain where students are encouraged to wear skirts as an act of solidarity, apparently with a boy who was expelled for doing that, for wearing one. It's not clear why the experiment's now being attempted in Scotland, however. Well, joining me, the former MSP and leader of Reform UK Scotland, that's Michelle Ballantine. Michelle, thanks ever so much for joining us this evening on GB News. Appreciate your time. What do you make of this particular idea, and what do you expect parents to do about it?
Well, I think, first of all, you mentioned in your opening that it's hard to understand why Castleview School felt it necessary to even have the day. I can understand what happened in Spain, where a boy was actually expelled for wearing a skirt, and pupils came out in solidarity and saying, actually, you shouldn't be expelled from school for choosing to wear a specific item of clothing. So that made a deal of sense. But why an Edinburgh primary school would feel it appropriate, I think a lot of parents are a bit baffled because it feels tokenistic. You might argue it's a bit of fun. It's interesting. They're trying to say clothes are gender neutral. Well, I think most of us would say yes, fine. We wear kilts in Scotland. We don't immediately see those as feminine or masculine as such, because you can wear them whether you're male or female. But this feels like, for a lot of parents, back to this idea that schools feel that they have to take moral stances, that they have to teach your children, even when they're very young, moral stances, and take away the parents' rights to decide on those processes and decide when it's appropriate to start educating your child around things like discrimination, around bullying, around things like transphobia and homophobia, and a lot of parents feel that schools are slightly getting their priorities wrong, that they should be focusing on education, which is about maths and English and languages and these kind of things, not receiving a letter home saying we want your boys and your girls to wear a skirt to school today. And if they're really concerned, then what does it matter? If they're genuinely saying clothes are gender neutral, then surely the school policy should be whatever you like. And if a boy comes in a skirt, no big deal. If a girl comes in a skirt, no big deal. Having a day actually feels like they're being, they're actually saying there's some sort of gender attachment to this. They're not actually saying we don't care what you wear on any given day. They're making a day of it, which seems illogical even in their arguments.
Look, Michelle, I don't know where Castleview Primary sits in the league tables, but we do know that over the last 10 years, according to the PISA league tables, which make international comparisons of academic achievement, when it comes, I think, particularly to the SNP might correct me if I get this wrong, but certainly in the sciences, Scotland has plummeted. A lot of schools yes. in Scotland have plummeted on sciences, I think in maths as well. And therefore this will strike some people as a kind of displacement activity, really. And I would argue, I think, worse than that, because there's a danger you are sowing the seeds of discord gratuitously, that you're enforcing a needless choice on parents, and some will take a position that says, OK, it's a good idea, let's send little Johnny in tomorrow in a skirt, and others won't. And there may be, and maybe some people think this is good, that there will be, tensions on the school gates and heated conversations and all the rest of it. And some people might say that's good, debating an important topic. Actually, it just feels like there are bigger things to be talking about, bigger things to be doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. It feels like in a world which at the moment is very divisive, where they are dividing people between the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated, parents who think it's a good idea to have their children vaccinated, parents who think it's not a good idea to have their children vaccinated. This is just another nail in that divisive coffin. And I think children need to just get on and be children. They don't need to be thinking about these deep and complex problems. They need to be able to play and laugh. They need to be corrected if they bully somebody, but they do need to be focusing on the things that matter in school, which is around, as you say, the STEM subjects, getting their English right, and actually being able to move on in an effective way educationally. And it just feels now that there's more focus on these divisive topics. And, we know bullying is rife in schools. Whatever the government say, bullying is a real problem for a lot of children. And this just adds another thing to be bullied about. You turn up in a skirt, if you're the one they all bully, they're going to laugh at you or give you a hard time if you're the boy. You don't turn up in a skirt, they're going to accuse you of being transphobic. You can't win. And children don't need that added pressure, and parents certainly don't. And I just think, as a parent, I put 6 children through school, and you are constantly dealing with this tension between what the school thinks is right for your children, what you think is right for your children. And I just think these things are going further than a school really ought to be going.
Michelle, as well as bringing up those kids, you've also been active in Scottish politics for a while. If somebody had said to me before I knew where this school was, where in the UK this was happening, I would have laid a modest bet on it being somewhere in the Central Belt. Why is it that under the SNP it would appear, when it comes to woke politics, parts of Scotland have gone doolally?
The SNP, particularly under the Scottish government, there seems to have been a drive to sort of make Scotland different, to somehow say that, we're different, we're special, we're going to have particularly feminist equality. And that's driven a lot by the First Minister's own position, and how she sees the world. And then she's brought in a lot of people around her that share that position. But it's also I think, a real problem in politics where parental views are often trodden over. So as parents now, we're increasingly being told by the state how to bring up our children and, you know, how we should discipline them, the morals they should be taught. And Scotland seems to be going further and further down that line. And I think it is very, very problematic and very worrying because it's not stopping the things that really matter, like bullying. You know, that's just as bad, and if in some cases worse now. But actually what they need to be addressing is the standard of education. Children have missed over a year of schooling in many cases, and that's going to have a massive effect on children's futures. And, you know, what we ought to be hearing now is a real push on how we bring up those educational standards, how we make up for the lost time that we've had as a result of COVID. Instead, we've got a country that is all about sound bites, is all about virtuous signalling, and it's all about creating division so that they can say, we're different to the rest of the UK, so let's just, you know, go our own way. But it's actually doing an inordinate amount of damage, and a lot of children who are going to come out, I think, very confused around what their role is in life, where they sit, what they think about things, and they're going to be scared of having an opinion because they've been told what to think, rather than being able to actually stand up for what they believe in and actually say what they think about things.
Michelle Ballantine, appreciate your time tonight. Really interesting. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure. Thanks a lot. Subject of our poll tonight, this one. Let's just flash it up for you, tell you how many people have voted. It's usually a decent measure of public interest in this. If it's above 10,000 in the space of an hour, you know it's exercising you a little bit, and we're getting there, heading towards that. An Edinburgh primary school wants boys to wear a skirt for a day to promote equality. Do you think this will be effective? Overwhelmingly, you think not. Andrew Doyle, host of Free Speech Nation, is alongside me. We'll do this in a slightly different way, if that's all right, Andrew.
Okay.
We'll start with the last question to Michelle Ballantine first. Because I thought her answer's quite interesting. We talked about this a lot, about what's going on in Scotland, woke culture. You know, there's a democratic switch there that allows people, if they don't like it, ultimately to take their vengeance at the ballot box. She says it's because it's part of the process of differentiation. They want to, the SNP want to show we're just not England.
I mean, that could be it. That's an interesting theory, that they want to sort of show, well, I suppose it's pushing for independence, isn't it, and saying that we are distinct.
By annoying a very large part of the election.
I mean, it sounds weird, doesn't it? I'm not so sure about this. I think it's very interesting what Michelle Ballantine was saying about the idea that they sort of want to be in loco parentis. They want to sort of intervene to extreme extents. And we've been there before, haven't we, with the named person scheme? Do you remember
Which was nuts, this idea that
Absolutely
it doesn't matter what kind of kid you are, you're not troubled, you're from a very happy family, but you will get a state-appointed guardian. I think they ditched the idea eventually.
I think it got ditched on their behalf by the court, actually. I mean, it didn't go through, thank goodness, because but it does point to a certain mentality within the SNP, a very paternalistic mentality, and they have all sorts of nanny state-ish policies. But I'm not sure that people can take their revenge at the ballot box. I mean, it is a one-party state, effectively. Who are they going to vote for? The Tories
hang
and
on a
Labour.
minute. You're here as a free speech spokesman, not as a political correspondent or a cephologist.
I'm sorry, but I'm just saying, you know, it does feel like the SNP has more leverage than most parties because they know they're not going to lose at the election. There isn't the competition. So, and maybe when you have a one-party state, effectively like that, you can get away with more of this stuff. But yeah, it is baffling because a lot of people are supporting the party, even though, in spite of these crazy policies, which a lot of people just don't support.
Let me just take up the SNP's part in a very limited way here. I mean, I've no idea whether what's going on at Castleview Primary School in Edinburgh has got anything to do with the SNP. Almost certainly not. I mean, you know, we're just setting it in that broader context. On this point, about a day, if anybody's just turning on, what are we talking about? We're talking about a school in Edinburgh where on a day, the boys will be invited to wear skirts to promote equality, because this has been happening in Spain.
Yes. Yeah, but it's incoherent. I mean, you've just shown the poll, which is saying, what, 97% of viewers are saying this won't promote equality. Well, quite. How will this promote equality? Has this really been thought through? Has anyone made a statement to explain how this could possibly promote equality? My suspicion is, and of course I absolutely don't know what's going on here, my suspicion here is it is one of these kind of activist teachers, one of these members of staff who's got on board with this gender ideology and wants to promote it in a ham-fisted way, because actually it isn't even coherent even in its own logic. It doesn't quite make sense, really. I mean, a lot of schools now are moving towards gender-neutral uniforms. You've got, I mean, over 40 secondary schools in the UK have moved to gender-neutral uniforms. The idea of that, I mean, I don't really care, you know, if people want to dress however they want to dress, that's fine. Although the motivation behind that move has been a little weird. It's been that that it's based on the premise that trans pupils or pupils who identify as the other sex will feel uncomfortable if other people are wearing uniforms that are connected to their sex. And that's a very patronising view of trans people at all, and is actually not experientially true. So the thinking on these things is always a little bit muddied, and that, I think, is what's happened here. I wonder what will happen with boys coming in skirts. You know, how do you go from that to this is going to help equality? I honestly can't see the connection.
I don't know, and I just think it gratuitously sows seeds of discord that need not happen. And I mean, if it was down to me, I certainly wouldn't be sending my lad in a skirt. But then, you know, maybe if you said to me, I really want to wear a skirt because all my pals are, then maybe I'd think again. But, you know, insofar as I'm expected to offer a view as a parent, and I still believe that parents do actually get ultimately the final say on how it goes, particularly with younger children, then I'll just shake my head and say, off you go, lad, in your shorts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's nothing biological about a male or female that makes them prefer a skirt to a pair of trousers. So I understand in that respect maybe they're trying to break down those preconceptions. But does anyone really think that's the case anyway? I'm not so sure. I think this is more connected to this mania around gender at the moment, and this complete sort of inability to think through what gender actually is. And what gender is, of course, you know, things like that. Boys in blue, girls in pink. That stuff is socially constructed. We can all see that. But gender is... Well, what I was going to say is that gender is, which you might prefer, is that gender is actually a very complex blend of biological factors which are tied to behaviour and social factors and cultural factors which are to do more with tradition. And it's not just all one or all the other. It's actually more complicated.
I hate it when I make that noise, and you've got me making that noise.
Well, actually, that's my goal. I like to make you make that noise.
But I was simply going to say that actually, you know, in the laboratory which is the Brazier family home, five girls, one boy, I observe that you know, setting aside the pink and blue thing, you know, the late mother was, if nothing else, a staunch feminist, and they were given every opportunity to play, you know, bash things with a big hammer, or play in the doll's house, and the division was ineluctable. I mean, they just gravitated to certain things, and I know there'll be people saying, oh, it was all, you know, you didn't even realise you were doing it. It was unconscious bias. I really don't think it was.
No, I mean, well, those things, what you're describing there is behavioural traits that are linked to many...
Biology. Half a billion years of evolution, Andrew.
Evolution, exactly. So there is that. But on the other hand, I think we could all agree that there are certain things in terms of the conditioning that you promote amongst boys that you don't promote amongst girls. You know, I mean, if a girl cries, people help her. If a boy cries, sometimes they'll say, oh, you've just got to man up a bit. You've just got to... You know, that does happen.
I'm guilty.
Well, right, okay. No, so you're acknowledging that.
Oh, yeah. Make that noise again to get myself off the hook. Just time for this one. Father of 6 lost his job after saying his manager was wrong to exclude white, middle-aged celebrities from opening a new building at Leicester University. Ricardo Champagne worked in HR for Leicester University Students' Union. He's won an employment tribunal after pointing out that any attempt to exclude a particular group, even middle-aged white men, was potentially offensive and derogatory. Andrew?
Well, I love that he's called Ricardo Champagne. I think it's a wonderful name. But yeah, this is basically a group. This is another story about competing victimhood, effectively. So Ricardo Champagne is making the point that the member of staff, I think it was Ms. Rudge, Ellen Rudge, had basically said we don't want any more white middle-class men, which is a silly thing to say to begin with. And then he emails her to say this is a problem because it's discriminatory. She then takes offence and says that his complaint was implying that she was a racist, so therefore she was very distressed about that. And she reported him to HR, and then HR investigated him, and then it ends up in a tribunal. So this is really high school stuff. I'm sorry, it's just
the way you told it, I just wish I'd never brought it back.
Well, fair enough. But it just goes to show that identity politics, all it ever does is tear us apart and make us look foolish. And actually, we need to move beyond it.
You've got 30 seconds on the painting of General Picton, who the most senior British officer who died at the Battle of Waterloo. His painting is hung at the National Museum of Wales. They used to go to a lot lovely buildings, lovely galleries, etc. And it's been removed following an assessment of slavery. He was the governor of Trinidad.
Yes, well, it's been removed from the public view, and they're going to bring it back with what they describe as a youthful reinterpretation of the painting, so that people are aware of the colonial context. By all means, making people aware of the context is fine. But the thing about a gallery is you don't need to interpret everything for the people there to see the paintings. They do that for themselves, and I get really annoyed by this kind of very patronising view that viewers of art need to be told what to think about the art. Actually, we can handle it ourselves. Thank you very much.
Andrew, that was 33.5 seconds. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, why has taxpayers' money meant, or what has it meant, for furloughed workers, and it's gone towards an office which represents an Iranian Ayatollah? Stay with us.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Now, an office in London which represents Iran's supreme leader enjoyed £109,000 of taxpayers' money as part of the COVID furlough scheme. The money went to a Shia mosque and cultural office based at a former cinema and bingo hall in West London. But it also acts as an outreach office for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Britain and Iran are currently, as you know, locked in several long-running disputes, perhaps most notably over Tehran's nuclear programme and the ongoing detention of a British citizen, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, whose husband's currently on a hunger strike in Whitehall. Well, we're joined now by the political YouTuber and broadcaster Maya Tousi. And Maya, thanks ever so much for coming in. I mean, the reason we ought to mention that you've got Iranian heritage, right?
Yes, yeah, my background is Persian. My parents were from Iran, and my mother was a political refugee, an actual refugee, not one of the... No, this is the most astonishing story, which I had to obviously clarify. Obviously, I broke it exclusively on my channel, but then obviously it got to the Times as well. Yeah. But it's one of the stories that the mainstream media aren't even talking about, and no one's really mentioning it, but it should be bigger than it is. Because
how did you find out? I'm always curious as to how did you find out?
Well, there was a person who was doing a lot of research, another Iranian person who did some research and came on my channel, and we were discussing it, and we were just talking about the Islamic centres. These are the hubs that the Iranian regime have. They're called Islamic centres. There are 5 of them in the UK, one main one in London, and they have a charity status, and they're supposed to be just like a big mosque sort of thing.
But they're also charitable status, but they're also limited companies.
That's exactly the cheeky part of it. So what they did was essentially, not only was it supposed to be a charity thing, they created a limited company on a company's house. So that meant that when lockdown started, they were entitled to furlough money and a COVID grant and everything. And so that's the over £100,000 been essentially stolen through that.
OK, strong word. I mean, just to take play the other card here. I mean, there's an argument that says if the government said it's a limited company, yes, they employ people, they've got to pay people, people have got to live, earn a livelihood, and the government said you can't earn the livelihood, right? So there is an argument that says they're eligible for furlough money.
If they hadn't been directly receiving funding already from the Iranian regime. They already get funding from the Iranian government to exist. They built the building and everything around it and all the salaries. So they have a representative of the supreme leader who's essentially, the whole thing is, the establishment is a secondary embassy. But they don't just do diplomacy, essentially. They do their own bidding. Now, there are a lot of conspiracy theories around it. I'm not going to get into that. I have my own theories, but we need evidence, of course, that some people say that they use those hubs for a lot of secret meetings and all this stuff that could be happening, but that's not my main issue with it. The issue is that these organizations that exist work directly for the Iranian regime. They use the charity status, then, despite the fact that they're charity, they have to go with the Charity Commission, their standards, when the general Soleimani, who got assassinated by the West, they decided to hold a vigil. And so that's again...
that changes things a little bit.
Exactly. And this organisation has been supported by Jeremy Corbyn. He makes speeches there. Nicola Sturgeon has had appearances at their events. And there's always been a lot of dodgy links already anyway. They work directly for the Iranian government. They don't do anything for this country or the people in this country. They don't contribute in any shape or form when it comes to community or charity at all. So the fact that you're right that you would say if it was just an organisation, limited company, then of course, regardless of who they are, you should, support them. But they're not, because then they're already supported by the Iranian regime. They get their salaries from them, not us.
If it could be demonstrated, and I mean, given that you're talking about a substantial sum, but not a crazy amount of money, but if it could be demonstrated that this is an organisation funded by the taxpayer, for heaven's sake, which is working against the interests of the British state.
Yes.
Should we try and get the money back?
Well, that's the thing. So, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest, a big betrayal of British taxpayers, and it shows that our system is broken right now because it's so bureaucratic. This is
just hang on. I mean, this was the depths of lockdown.
Of course.
We were throwing money at all kinds of things we shouldn't have been throwing, because the checks and balances in the time available couldn't be constructed. We get that. It was a crisis, it was an emergency.
Absolutely. My issue is not actually the furlough thing. It's actually just even before furlough, for years and years, this organisation has existed. They hold meetings. They are the ones who organise the Hamas and Hezbollah marches in London. They are the ones behind it, officially. It's not like a secret.
You may know that. I can't.
Of course, yeah. But so we have a situation where right now, Richard Ratcliffe, the husband of Nazanin Ratcliffe, Zaghari Ratcliffe, who's going on hunger strike, starting his campaigns. Right now, none of that's working. We already have these hubs in the UK. If Liz Truss and the Foreign Office were really serious about dealing with the Iranian regime, cutting ties, because that's the policy of Foreign Office, cutting ties, why are we not cutting ties with the Islamic centres? Shut them down. If that's the policy of Foreign Office, and it's not me saying it, that's what they already want to do. They've already cut a lot of ties with the Iranian regime. Why do we still have a representative office of the Supreme Leader being funded by them and dictated by them, working against the interests of the British public?
It seems like a legitimate question, and we're glad you put it. You posed it for us. Maya Tousi, thanks so much for coming in. Thanks a lot. Well, there was a time in the 1930s when the cult of personality surrounding Joseph Stalin reached a new low. At the end of his speeches, which were long, his doting Communist Party audience would applaud. To encourage adoration, the first person to stop clapping was routinely shot in front of everybody else. This had the effect of prolonging the ovation, but at some cost. The audience would clap until physically spent. People literally passed out, but that didn't save them. The first person to stop applauding the dear leader, even if that meant they'd fainted from fatigue, was also, you guessed it, shot on the spot. Well, the Soviets grew out of this devotion to one individual, but in the one recognisably old-school communist state still just about hanging on to this vile creed, the cult of personality persists. And in fact, in North Korea, by some measures, it's getting stronger. Kim Jong-un is said to be so certain of his own light, his own genius, that he will no longer tolerate any state recognition of the efforts to build paradise on earth made by his father, Kim Jong-il, or his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, who founded the communist state in North Korea. Their pictures have been removed from official buildings in Pyongyang. You can make a reasonable guess as to what happens to anyone who mentions their name. Well, Kim Jong-un, who's now 37, is, according to South Korea's spy agency, promoting an ideology which revolves around his thoughts. It's being called Kim Jong-unism. Join me now, Christian Whiten, a former diplomat and North Korea expert at the US State Department under the Trump and Bush administrations, now at the Centre for the National Interest. Joining us tonight. I'm always slightly awkward about the North Korea stories. It's so easy to treat Kim as a sort of panto villain. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people are being tortured and sometimes starved to death.
Exactly right. It's privation across the country, and they always seem to be just one step away from another famine, like the one they had in the 90s, where 1 or 2 million people may have died. And there are reports about a poor harvest, about farmers being strip searched to make sure they're not concealing anything from their own fields. But it is an interesting development with this cult of personality, because his father and grandfather, and incidentally, North Korea is the only communist system ever to have a hereditary succession, and they've actually had two, from grandfather to then to Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and now Kim Jong-un, to sort of downgrade and erase the legacy of his father and grandfather is significant, because these people were cast as infallible, as almost godlike in North Korean system, where North Koreans at least purported to believe to some degree that they would play a round of golf and score only an 18, a hole in one on each course and each hole, that they never went to the bathroom, and sort of to cast them aside and to elevate yourself it's a big deal for North Korea.
And I suppose the way I've read it, Christian, is it was a sort of marriage between North Korean culture and communism, because you know far better than most of us that there seems to be this sort of reverence for the father figure there, but that, as you say, is at odds with the communist system, which doesn't generally reverence the idea of an ancestor.
It's a highly centralized, highly paternalistic, if you will, system. And in fact, similar to Hitler, actually, and also, frankly, to Stalin, you had very little role, very little public profile for the wife of the dictator. And that has persisted. There's a little bit of a twist with Kim Jong-un, the current dictator, where his sister at times has had a bigger public role that waxes and wanes, which is also fairly common for bigwigs within the North Korean government, where sometimes they will be in favor and included on lists of important officials and parts of the bureaucracy, the senior bureaucracy, and other times falling off if they're out of favor. Same was sort of what we were left with in analyzing the Stalin years in the Soviet Union, where you look at the May Day parade and see someone a little bit closer to Stalin. He's closer to the marshal this year. He must be favored. So that faction is rising. It's sort of trying to analyze a lot from the very little information we have from North Korea.
What little information we have, Christian, I mean, sometimes you can derive a lot just from the pictures. I mean, we haven't been able to get it on screen, but there was a picture I was looking at in the papers this morning, and you've seen it time and time again. We've seen it many times. He's walking down a line of adoring citizens, and some of them, maybe even a majority of them, are literally crying tears of joy at being in the close orbit of their great leader. How do you inspire so much love?
Well, it's a whole lot of fear, as you pointed out, as with Stalin and other cults of personalities, or Mao Zedong and Mao Zedong thought. Any sort of off-color comment. I mean, you could talk about other dictatorships like the late Soviet Union or Iraq under Saddam or Iran today, but North Korea is fairly unique that, you could be drunk and accidentally make one off-color remark about the dear leader, the great leader, whatever we're calling him this week, and no one will ever hear from you again in some circumstances. Information is so tightly controlled. We beam in Radio Free Asia Korean service, Voice of America Korean service, and some defectors have a smaller signal that gets transmitted in. They try and jam it. Some of it gets through, but if you're North Korean, it's a serious crime to listen to those broadcasts. You might do it under the sheets at night. You might not even tell your own family members you're accessing illegal information.
And just a thought on the role of the South Korean intelligence service here. I mean, we're taking them at their word. I mean, if they're saying that he's taking down the pictures of Dad and Granddad, we're believing them. But you can see why they would say this, because it creates a little bit of destabilisation. It suggests a certain monomania on his part. Well, he's already self-evidently a bit of a maniac. But you can see why there's something in it for them.
It is, although South Korea's current government is left-wing and is to an extent pro-engagement, has been trying to find a reason to talk to North Korea. Previous left-leaning governments in South Korea have done this and essentially failed. One of them created in the 2000s something called the Kaesong Industrial Complex. It was supposed to bring South Korean capital together with North Korean labor. Some of us thought it looked a little bit like slave labor. Really what it was a way for North Korea to vacuum South Korean money up and deliver very little in return. Certainly no liberalization, no opening. This is juxtaposed against a desire by the Biden administration to initiate talks with North Korea. North Korea so far has said no to that, probably holding out for a good deal. They like to receive goodies before the talks begin.
Christian, we're almost out of time. You've got 15 seconds. How does this hideous regime end? Do the Chinese withdraw their patronage? Does something else happen? Revolution from within? What is it?
It's hard to say, but with that much control of information, more information from the outside can be very destabilizing. So what looks like the perfect dictatorship, might one day come tumbling down.
Well, do you know what? I think a lot of people globally would hope that's absolutely true. Christian Whiteon, really good to talk to you again. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks ever so much. Let's just reflect again, if we can, on that poll for you. It was definitely the story of the night in terms of what was getting you going, exercising a lot of interest. Story from Edinburgh. We'll try and bring you a bit more on this. I don't think we know quite enough about it, but that simple question. Edinburgh Primary School wants boys to wear a skirt for a day to promote equality. Is it effective? Forget it. Mark's next.
Hello again. A change in wind direction and therefore a change in weather during the next 24 hours. Initially clear and chilly, but then cloudier skies turn up from the north and it does turn milder as a result. We've had this cold northerly airflow during the last few days, but during the next 24 hours we replace it with more of a westerly airflow with weather fronts arriving from the Atlantic. Having said that, it's a clear and chilly evening for southern Scotland, much of England and Wales, but through the night a blanket of cloud starts to sink south across the country, lifting temperatures in the north, whilst it stays chilly and clear in the south. Frosty as we begin things in the Midlands, East Anglia, southern and southeast England, but much milder further north, 8s and 9s for much of Scotland with those cloudy skies, and some outbreaks of mainly light rain for parts of western Scotland, northwest England, West Wales as well. For most, though, Friday's looking dry, and although it will turn cloudier in the south and east of England, we'll still see some bright spells into the afternoon, and it will feel a whole lot milder compared to recent days, 11 to 13 Celsius. We will have lost that wind chill, but we've replaced it with a lot of cloud, and that cloud sticks around for bonfire night. But during the evening, actually, most places will stay dry with relatively light winds, so it's not looking too bad for any bonfire and fireworks displays. But it does turn more unsettled towards the end of the night for northern and western Scotland, with heavier rain arriving here. And for most, it's a much milder night, temperatures staying up at 6 to 8 Celsius by and large. A bright start then across much of England and Wales for the weekend, but it turns unsettled across Scotland, Northern Ireland and then later northwest England.